Welcome back to Luke's Properties YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to answer the 10 most asked questions about rent to rent. I get these questions every day in my comments, in my DMs, so I thought it would be helpful if I answer all of these questions in one video so that I can help everyone. So hopefully, if you've ever sent me any of these questions, then today they'll get answered. So let's get into it. So question 1, can I really start a rent to rent business with just £5,000? Well, the short answer is yes, I did, and many of my students have too. £5,000 is normally enough to cover your deposit, your first month's rent to the landlord, to get some paint and decoration done, and to buy furniture from IKEA. That's what the £5,000 will consist of normally. In some cases, you might go slightly over, maybe to £6,000, and in some cases, slightly under. My most recent deal cost me around £3,500 to £4,000 to get started. Some of my first deals 7 years ago cost me around £6,000. My most expensive deal cost me £8,000, but that was a 10-bedroom HMO, so a very large building, and it did need quite a lot of work doing to it. So £5,000 to get your first rent to rent deal is pretty standard. My first ever rent to rent deal 7 years ago cost me around £4,000. If I remember, I think at the time I agreed a rent of around £1,200 a month. I paid 2 months rent to an estate agent at the time, so £2,400, and then I spent another £1,500 to £2,000 on furnishing the property. I bought all the furniture from a charity shop. I cleaned the house top to bottom with my girlfriend and my dad, and we found a group of contractors to come and rent the house from us for a premium within a few days. Those contractors paid us, I think, around £2,600 to £2,700 per month at the time, and after we paid the landlord their rent and we put aside some money for bills, we were left with £900 per month in profit, which worked out to be £10,800 per year, and over 5 years that was £54,000. My next 2 deals were very similar, on the same road in fact, and we just rinsed and repeated the same process. Those next 2 deals cost me around £4,000 to get started, and the same company that were renting house number 1 had 12 more employees who needed housing, so we put them in house number 2 and 3. We were then making £2,700 per month, which is more than the average UK salary from 3 rent to rent properties in around 6 months from starting the business. So the first £10,000 made came from one single HMO, my first deal. By the end of the year, that deal had made me over £10,000. So the key takeaway here is, yes, you can start with just £5,000. And with rent to rent, capital is a multiplier, not a barrier to hold you back. Second question I get all the time is, what if I have zero property experience? Well, when I started my rent to rent business 7 years ago, I didn't have any experience either. I was a semi-professional footballer and a delivery driver, not an estate agent. But I learned by doing. Rent to rents run on processes, scripts, checklists, and systems. 80% of my students, including Mohammed, for example, who in 6 months after joining our program was making £5,000 per month from his rent to rents, also started with zero background in property. All he did was follow my processes, scripts, systems, and checklists, plugged them into his business, followed my standard operating procedures, and got his business to £5,000 a month in just 6 months. I've also got a video on YouTube called How I Made My First £100,000, where I discuss how I made my first £100,000 from rent to rent in more detail. So you should watch this. But remember, I had no prior experience before starting my business. I learned by doing, and you can too. The third question I get all the time is, which legal contracts will keep me safe? Well, a company let agreement is pretty standard. You'll use this when you're doing a rent to rent deal through an estate agent or a landlord. You could also use a management agreement if you're working directly with a landlord. Typically, you'd use this for a 1 to 3 year term. Or if you're taking on a large HMO, by large I mean 7, 8 bedrooms or more, and if you're helping out with the refurbishment and investing some capital into the landlord's asset, then you may want to use a commercial lease agreement. Especially if the term is over 3 years and it's a larger unit, it makes sense to use a lease agreement, as we find this agreement to be more long-standing and specific. You can find all of the agreements that I use inside my program. We update our agreements often with every regulation tweak. A common rookie mistake that many new rent-to-renters make is using an AST contract. You can't do this because this makes the subletting process illegal. You can't rent a property under an AST contract and then re-rent it to individual tenants, because an AST contract is for an individual, not a company. So the correct way of doing things would be to use one of these 3 contracts, and then you could rent to individuals and give them AST contracts. But you can't sign an AST contract with the landlord and then give tenants an AST contract. That's when it becomes an illegal sublet. So don't do this. The fourth question that I get a lot is, where do I actually find rent-to-rent deals? Well, I've got videos on this on my YouTube of how we find rent-to-rent deals, but generally speaking, you should be sending direct to landlord letters. In those letters, you should be pushing on the pain points of being a landlord. You should also email landlords. 60% of my rent-to-rent portfolio has come from direct to landlord letters. So you should definitely be using this strategy. You should also be speaking to estate agents. On those calls, you should be demonstrating your credibility. There's demos of me doing this on my YouTube channel, so go and watch those. Another thing you should be doing is, whilst trying to find deals, you should also be trying to find contractors and infrastructure intel. By doing this, you're going to find your ideal tenants at the same time as finding deals. That way you can pair the two together. So when you do get the keys to your first rent-to-rent property, you already have some information from contractors in the area that are working on infrastructure and are in need of all bills included short-term accommodation. A tip to find these types of people would be to search your local planning portals and find out what's being built in the area, which developments are happening. One of my students is doing this right now. He's aiming to start his rent-to-rent business in Bedford, and in Bedford they plan to build a Universal Studios. So there's going to be thousands and thousands of contractors that are going to be working on this job that are going to need accommodation. You could be getting the information of these contractors whilst speaking to landlords and estate agents. And then when you get the keys to your first deal, you can pair the two together. Your rent-to-rent company can be the middleman in between the two. You can provide value to agents, landlords and contractors and get paid for your service. So this is a top tip. You can also use software like Trello for CRM tracking. You want to aim for 30 outreaches a week to make sure you have a pipeline that compounds. I found a rent-to-rent deal in the first 10 weeks of 2025. It was a 4-bed in Wales. I found the landlord on Gumtree. I spoke to him, viewed the property and closed on that deal over a 12-day period. So these landlords are out there. You just have to know how to find them. The next question I get all the time is, will landlords or agents trust a newbie? Well, it's not so much about you as an individual. It's about your service solving their pain. Landlords experience void periods, compliance issues and stress. Sometimes agents have properties that aren't always easy to rent out. You can solve those problems with your service. And if you solve people's problems in business, they'll always give you a chance because you're adding value to them. And when you add value to people, you normally get paid. So you should value stack your offer. You should offer guaranteed rent. To sweeten the deals, you could handle the annual gas certificate and the electrical certificate, and you could offer weekly inspections, or maybe you could suggest your housekeeper would inspect the property when they're cleaning every other week. If you stack your offer with value and you solve people's pain, then landlords and agents aren't looking at you as a newbie, they're looking at you as a problem solver. If you have any social proof of working with any landlords in the past, even if it's friends or family, then this will help your case too. And once you've got your first rent-to-rent deal and you document the process, you can always use that first deal as a case study to get your second, third and fourth deals. Something I did in the beginning was, when I got my first rent-to-rent deal, when I would approach other landlords, I would give them the number of my first landlord, get them to give him a call, and he would give me a positive recommendation. I got a few deals over the line just by doing this. So social proof can really help. And once you've got that first deal, you should really use that as a case study to get more. So my 3-step credibility opener when you're speaking with landlords or agents is to highlight and heighten the problem. So if it's an empty property and the landlord's had bad tenants in the past, then heighten that and speak about that, ask questions about that, dig a little deeper. Then if you have any proof that you've helped landlords like this in the past, then show that to them. Give the phone number of your previous clients and get your potential client to give your existing client a call. And then finally, offer your proposal. Craft an offer that the landlords can't refuse. Stack it with value. Be likable, be trustworthy, and you can't lose. My first few rent-to-rent deals were through an estate agent, and I was a newbie. So if I can do it, I'm sure you can too. Just do exactly what I did. Solve pain, be helpful, value stack. If you have any social proof, then show that. Heighten the problem, make a proposal. The 6th question I get all the time is, what if I can't fill the rooms? This is a very common fear that a lot of new rent-to-renters have. But everything rents for the right price. If you start with the tenant avatar in mind and you target the rooms towards them, then you will find them. And what most likely will happen is they'll find you. For example, in many of my adverts, when I market rooms, I'll put in a headline, 4 rooms ideal for welders, 4 rooms ideal for railway engineers, 3 rooms ideal for nurses. By calling out your ideal tenant avatar and creating a product that suits them, you will attract them. So be specific in your copy, be specific with the way you furnish the house, the way you market the house, the way you present the house, and you will find the right type of tenant. You may have to be patient over a couple weeks, but if you build it, they will come. Another thing you could do is pre-marketing. So you could list the property on SpareRoom and on Facebook before you've exchanged contracts, just to test the market, just to get some traffic and to get some leads coming in before you've even agreed on somewhere and got the keys. These are called dummy ads, and we do these all the time. I teach you exactly how to do this in my program. All you have to do is copy me. Another thing you can do is partner with companies. So we partnered with Network Rail and we had a block booking for 12 rooms spread across 3 houses. So rather than trying to find individual tenants, we worked with one company who sent us 12 tenants. They all paid us a premium. It was nice, easy work for us, less admin, less variables, and you're getting paid from a company rather than individuals. So this can work really well. Your vacancy room target or your void period target should be under 5%. My worst month in 7 years was around 8%, and that was during COVID, when we lost a lot of tenants. Many of our tenants went home to different countries, but we managed to adjust and pivot, and we found key workers to fill those voids. Another tip would be to create a WhatsApp list of potential tenants. So when people are messaging you on SpareRoom, on Facebook, take their information and put them into a WhatsApp group. You can create a waiting list, or you can just have a separate WhatsApp chat for each of these potential tenants or groups. And when you get your first rent-to-rent deal, you can message them directly and get them to come and do a viewing, maybe send them some videos, some photos of the property, and try and get them signed up. Another tip is to leave ads up all year round to stay ahead. So even though we haven't got any empty properties at the moment, we leave our ads up all year round so that we're constantly getting traffic, we're constantly getting approached by new companies, by new tenants. We store their information on WhatsApp, and as soon as we have another deal or one of our rooms or houses becomes available, we message those people and see if they're still interested and try and get them signed up. So there's always a way to fill rooms. You just have to be proactive. We're in a housing crisis at the moment. The demand far outweighs the supply. There's always people looking for property, but more specifically, there's always individuals looking for, all bills included, short-term accommodation, and they're happy to pay a premium for that. You just have to stay ahead of the game and make sure you're being proactive with your marketing. The 7th question I get all the time is, how much profit does one deal really make? Well, on average, my rent-to-rent deals make around £900 per month in profit, but my most recent deal is a 4-bedroom and it makes £800 in profit per month. We collect around £2,100 in rent from a group of 4 railway workers. The running costs are around £500, so gas, electric, water, Wi-Fi, etc. That leaves us with £800 per month in profit, which works out to be around £9,600 per year. My first rent-to-rent deal was a 6-bedroom, and that netted us £900 per month, which worked out to be around £10,800 per year. In your first year of business, you should be compounding, reinvesting your first 3 to 4 months of profit, and then using that profit to fund your next deal. This is how I grew. I only had around £6,000 in the very beginning, but I would save up the profit from my first deal for a few months and then roll that into another deal, which would then make me another £900 per month. I would keep doing this over and over again. So rather than paying myself a salary, I would just reinvest the profit to build my monthly cash flow and to grow the business. We also have one rent-to-rent deal that makes us around £2,000 per month in net profit. It's a large HMO. We've had it for 5 years now. So there really is a huge opportunity with rent-to-rent to make good cash flow. The 8th question I get all the time is, what if I fail? Well, let's try and reframe this. Let's look at the worst case scenario. I've been quite open about some of my rent-to-rent failures on my YouTube channel, so you should go and watch those videos if you haven't already. The interesting point about all of those so-called failures is that they were all lessons, and they actually made me improve as an entrepreneur and they made my business stronger. So you don't really fail with rent to rent. You learn and you improve and your knowledge grows. I've lost a few £1,000s here and there, but there's always going to be a cost in business. I've made way more than I've lost, and the lessons I've learned from those houses where I did lose money made me into a better rent-to-rent operator and helped me grow my business to multiple six figures in profit. So you can't really fail, you can only learn. My program guarantees you your first rent-to-rent deal in 180 days or less. If for whatever reason we haven't got you that result in that time frame, then we give you 6 months of coaching for free. So you can't really fail, you're going to get there one way or another. The way we can guarantee this is we hold you accountable. We have weekly Zoom conversations. You get my phone number. We speak on WhatsApp as often as you need. So with me in your corner, this will create a safety net for you. One of my most recent rent-to-rent success students had her first couple failures over a 7-week period. She had 2 offers rejected, but then she closed on her 3rd offer 7 to 14 days after being rejected by her first 2. So going back to my point, you can't fail, you can only learn, and failure always turns to wins. You just have to stay the course. The 9th question we get all the time is rent to rent still worth it in 2025? Well, the short answer is yes. As I said, my most recent deal that I got 10 weeks into 2025 is making me £800 per month in profit. How many of those would you need to replace your income? Room demand is still very high. There's a cost of living squeeze at the moment in the UK. There's thousands and thousands of people that would rather spend £500, £600, £700 per month on an all bills included room, bedsit or flat rather than spending £900, £1,000, £1,100 per month and paying the bills on top of that. It makes more sense for them to spend £500, £600, £700 per month with all their bills included. At least that way, if they're making 2 to 2.5 grand, they can still save 3/4 of their income rather than spending over half of their income on accommodation. So demand is still high. There's also thousands and thousands of landlords that are becoming fed up with self-managing their properties. We've got the Renters' Right Bill coming into play soon, which gives landlords less power, less control over their properties, and gives tenants more rights. It's also going to slow down the eviction process for non-paying tenants, so you won't be able to evict a non-paying tenant for 4 to 6 months. Whereas if a landlord chose to work with you as a company, then if things weren't working out, the landlord or the company could hand in 2 months' notice and leave. We put this in our most recent rent-to-rent contract, so there's still a high room demand for your end user, being the tenant or guests. And there's also a high demand for your service from landlords because your company let option is more appealing to them than a traditional tenant. No void periods, no hassle. You could even offer to cover some minor maintenance. These are all perks of working with a rent-to-rent company rather than a traditional tenant. So rent-to-rent is still definitely worth it in 2025. There's also lots of amateurs who got into the rent-to-rent market in 2023 to 2024 who didn't know what they were doing, did their numbers all wrong, overpromised, underdelivered, didn't make any money, and have since exited the market. There's thousands and thousands of rent-to-rent operators who came and went over this period because they didn't know what they were doing. They might have watched 1 or 2 YouTube videos, got carried away, tried to do the Airbnb model, did their numbers wrong, and got wiped out. In contrast, if you're actually good at rent-to-rent and you're practiced and educated and trained, then you can rise above all the amateurs and take the lion's share of the best business. You can cherry pick the best landlords and you can make the most money because you'll be the most skilled. So rather than fighting for the scraps at the bottom of the market, you can make the most money, have the best landlords with the best properties at the top of the market just by being trained, educated and skilled, which I can help you with. The forecast for micro HMOs and the co-living trend is set to accelerate over the next 5 years. So there's still going to be a huge demand for rooms, house shares, and all bills included short-term accommodation. My own portfolio grew from 1 to 5 deals in my first year. I've now been doing this for 7 years, and when I speak to landlords on the phone today versus 7 years ago, they're just as motivated to work with me as they were back then when I was a newbie, if not even more motivated. So is rent to rent worth it in 2025? I would say so. And the final question I get all the time is, how do I get my first deal? Well, you set yourself a realistic time frame. On average, most of my success students get their first deal within 6 months of working with me. The first 2 weeks normally consist of setting their company up, becoming compliant, having their proof of funds ready, so they're 5 to 6 grand to take on their first rent to rent deal. Week 3 and 6 normally consists of daily outreach with a target of speaking to 5 landlords and 3 agents every week. Week 4 to 6 normally consists of them going on 20 viewings, running the numbers with me on Zoom and on WhatsApp, using my deal analyzers. Week 6 to 10, we're normally making offers, negotiating and signing preferred contracts. Weeks 9 to 12, we're normally furnishing, marketing and pre-filling the properties. Month 4 to 6, you should be cash flowing, and then it's a case of saving the profit, rinsing and repeating. My most recent success student, Aman, she'll be making £700 per month in profit once that house is filled, and she completed this whole process in just 49 days from joining our program. So those are the 10 most asked rent to rent questions that we get all the time. I hope by answering some of these questions I've given you some clarity. If you want me to help you get your first 1 to 3 rent to rent properties within the next 180 days or less, guaranteed, then I'll put a link in the video description below. Click the link and there'll be an opportunity for you to book a call in with myself. On that call, we'll have a conversation and work out if we're a good fit for each other and if I'll be a good mentor for you. If not, then keep watching my content, keep copying what I'm doing, copy what my successful students are doing, and I'm sure you'll get your first rent to rent deal. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.